Hello! I have put together a few little videos just to get you started with embroidery. Maybe you might be new to embroidery or getting back into it, or just curious about how I work. So hopefully the next few minutes will help you in getting started and really enjoying this kit. So I am going to be showing you how to do things with an animal print kit that I'm working on at the moment. Firstly, you're going to have your fabric in your hoop and also a hoop. So to open your hoop, you want to undo your hoop. So twisting anti-clockwise and just loosening your two parts like so. Then you want to place the fully circular piece down, flat on a surface in front of you, and then place your pattern over the top. You want to have whatever you're working on, the picture or the in the middle. So getting it nice and central and then sandwiching that in place with your top part of your hoop. Once that's in, you can tighten up your hoop. So tightening it up, twisting that clockwise, making it really nice and tight. You can see it can go much further in. And once you've got that nice and tight, if you need to stretch your fabric out anymore, hold it at opposite ends, opposite corners, and pull. Having really nice tight fabric when you're working really makes it a lot easier to stitch other than having really loose fabric, and that's why we use an embroidery hoop. So twisting that, making sure your fabric's really nice and tight. It should sound a little bit like a drum. So that is how you put your fabric in your hoop. Over time, the more you touch the fabric, the more it will loosen. So you will need to stretch your fabric out as you're working. One thing you can do, which will prevent this if you really don't like stretching the fabric out all the time, is you could think about something like wrapping the inside of your hoop. So here's a hoop I've done before, and I have just taken an inch or a piece of bias binding, and I've wrapped it around my hoop, put a little bit of glue on the centre, wrapping it all the way around. Having some fabric against the other fabric really helps create a little bit of friction and stops it moving quite so much. I find that really useful. I tend to wrap the inside of my hoop rather than the outside of my hoop. Although if it's really, really delicate or slippy fabric, I also tend to use the bottom and the top. The bottom I tend to use because I find it really kind of helps the inside. It really helps stop it moving so much more. The outside I tend to wrap if it's a fabric that I'm concerned that it might, if I leave my hoop on, it might create like that outline shape and leave it there. And I don't want that to be visible once I've finished my stitching. So I tend to wrap the inside rather than the outside. The outside, if you wrap, can also look quite pretty. If you want to look at that in more detail, I have an article on my blog, which is on my website. I think it's the second or third one down, depending on when you're watching this. So yeah, there's some more information there. So the next thing I want to show you is splitting your threads. When you thread up, I tend to always stretch out my fingers, so stretched out fingertips to elbow. I tend to use, it's about 30 to 40 centimetres depending on the length of your arm. I tend to use only that much thread because it's much, much easier to work with and you're far less likely to get lots of tangles and knots. It is tempting to use longer lengths, but I would advise only using stretched out fingertips to your elbow. So I cut my thread and I'm going to split my threads down. So in a lot of my embroidery designs, I'm not using all 6 strands, which is what you have here. I'm using 2 or 3 strands, or occasionally using 1. So once you've got your 30 to 40 centimetres of thread, you want to separate them out at the top, and then you can just gently pull. With this shorter length, this is really nice and easy. If you do find it tangling at any point, just put them back together, unravel, and then unwind again. It's really good practice with embroidery to split out each of your threads. So I've got 3 strands here, 1, 2, 3. It's really good to split them out because as the threads are twisted, whether they're going onto big cones like you see I've got here, or whether they're going onto the skeins, they're twisted. So the more twists there are, the more likely you are to get some knots when you're sewing. And knots are really very frustrating, and it's not your fault, it's just what happens. So now I've got my threads all nicely split, now it's time to thread up. Now a lot of people, when I'm doing workshops, don't actually know how to use a needle threader, and they are majestic when you know how. So I'm going to show you how to use one. So these are the needle threaders. They are very, very, very easy to break. So I'm going to show you how to use it in a way that you won't break it quite so often. You want to pinch this part of your needle threader because it's very, very, very loose, just this part here. So pinching that end there, you are going to thread up your needle with your needle threader. So threading up that needle threader, then you are going to be threading your needle, threading the thread through this much larger hole, which will make things a lot easier rather than putting them through the eye of the needle. So threading up that part there, threading up that needle threader, and then I'm going to switch over because I am right-handed. I'm going to pinch this side of my needle threader, and then I'm going to pull the thread through. If you try to use the needle threader for 6 strands, you will find it will break very, very easily. But for 3 strands or 2 strands, it's quite easy. So pulling that through, and then once it's all the way through, letting go. So that is how you start up with your needle threader. And we're ready to do some stitching. I'm going to switch over to another kit that I've already started, and I'm going to show you how we're going to use that. So, getting started with your stitching. I have threaded up my needle and I have no knot at the other end. So what you can do is you can add a knot at one end. So I'm going to show you how to start with a knot at the back, and I'm also then going to show you how to start with a knot on the surface. So starting with a knot at the back, I would just bring my needle up to the surface, like so, and start my stitching. So in this case, I'm going to be doing a split stitch. I would just start my stitching like so. What this does do is it has a knot at the back, and the knot at the back is not a problem unless you are wanting to mount your work onto something flat. Because then you'll have lots more bumps on the surface, and the fabric won't be able to sit flat. So what I can also going to do is I'm going to show you how to start without the knot at the back. When you're really, really new to embroidery, starting with a knot at the back is actually really useful because it really helps you with your tension. So if you're doing something and you're not thinking you're going to frame it in any particular way, maybe you're going to keep it in the hoop, that's absolutely fine to have a knot at the back. If you are, however, going to maybe put your design onto a card, or you're going to put it into a picture frame where it's going to have a flat backing, you might want to consider stitching and starting in another way, which is what a lot of sort of professional embroiderers would do. So I'm going to show you now next how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to start your embroidery from the surface rather than from the back. I have a little knot that I'm going to be using, and what I'm going to do is, if I'm going to be starting my embroidery here, I'm going to bring my needle down from the surface and bring my knot over here. Okay, so my knot is on the surface of what I'm stitching. I'm then going to do a couple of tiny little split stitches to anchor my needle, anchor my thread so it's not going to go anywhere. So one tiny little split stitch, bringing my needle up through the centre of that stitch and going in the other direction. I tend to add about 3 little tiny stitches altogether. If you are starting along a line, so maybe it might be a stem of a leaf or a flower, do these little split stitches, which should be no bigger than around ½ centimetre in total. You want to do those along your line that you're working along, and then we'll go back and you'll stitch, whether it's a stem stitch or a back stitch, and you'll do that over the top of that. So once I've got that in place and I feel like my thread is really nice and secure, I can take my scissors, I can pull my knot out ever so slightly, and I'm going to give it a trim, being careful not to trim my fabric. So now I have no knot on the surface, that's gone, but my thread is really nice and secure. And I'm ready to continue stitching. So I'm going to bring my needle up over here, and I'm now going to continue doing my split stitch line all the way across as I have been doing. So I'm able to continue. So that is starting a knot, and that means starting my embroidery with a knot on the surface. And now I have no knot on the back, so the back of my fabric is really nice and smooth. And it means that when I want to mount this piece of work onto a piece of card or put it into a box frame, then nothing is going to be raised up, and it's going to be a really nice smooth surface on the back. I hope you find that helpful. I'm going to continue doing some sewing now, and hope you enjoy what you're going to get going on. Bye. I'm going to show you now how I finish up my embroideries once I've finished doing some stitching. So once I've finished that area, I'm going to flip my hoop over so you can see the back of the hoop. Take it off my stand. And turn it over to the back. So you can see all my little stitches I've got here. Now you could add a knot and draw it down to the surface, but as I've started with no knots, I'm now going to finish with no knots. So rather than creating a knot here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push my needle underneath these threads, so securing it in a different way. You want to have a secure thread so you don't end up with it all unraveling. So essentially creating a little bit of a knot at the back, but without actually having a knot, so it will sit flatter. So looping it under, I do that about 3 or 4 times. If you have done a long length, you could sort of wind your needle around at the back. Just do it until you feel like it's secure. So 2 or 3 stitches or 2 or 3 wraps would be absolutely fine. And then once you're finished, you want to trim that thread off. So give it a little bit of an extra, but not too much, so it then catches on any other stitches you might have. So that's how I tend to finish the backs of my hoops.